Good evening, everyone. So, this is the stream I've wanted to do for quite a while. We have a Labour government, splendid. But there's also some debriefing to go on from the election itself. There are some major points of interest. This isn't going to be like the full debrief. I've prepared a few things to go over. There's lots of interest in the details. Obviously, there's lots of ridiculously bad takes. Did we have a nice family dinner? Yes, we did. I had a nice fillet steak with prawns. They insisted on dumping like green leaves on all our plates though, so that disappeared. No ad what's up. So I'm trying another experiment. So there'll be no monetization during the live stream. I'll just flick it on for afterwards because whatever YouTube have done recently has just screwed with it all. But if I keep forgetting it, we'll have to go on. Sorry about that. But let's have a little look. First of all, seat efficiency. There are two stories in terms of the data. I mean, there's lots of things in the data. It's all very interesting. But there are two big things. First of all is seat efficiency. Second of all is tactical voting. And the two are obviously quite strongly related. So here are the the voter efficiencies for 2024 and then 2019. Now, when I say efficiency, just to be clear here, because obviously efficiency, technically a larger number is better. It's between 0 and 1 in the technical engineering sense. So this is how many votes you needed per seat you won. So it's the quotient of the votes that each party won, although I've put independents in 2024 as well, divided by the number of seats won. So Labour absolutely beasted the vote efficiency this year. But if we look back to 2019, we can actually see back then the big winners were the SNP. They were superb on their voter efficiency. Now, technically, Labour have got an even more efficient vote this year. However, it is worth bearing in mind in 2024, the election just gone, Labour benefited from two types of vote efficiency. The first was their own strategy. So, and this is what I keep saying, you have to, people talking about votes won or vote share, it's like, that's not the name of the game. It should be. It should be a party that gets a higher share of the vote in a future election should get more power because they represent a greater proportion of the public. That is the way it should work, which is why I'm in favour of electoral reform. But it is not how the system we have works. We have a first past the post system. So anyone talking about but vote share or but number of votes, they're political children. It's utterly ridiculous. It's number of seats. How do you win? You want to win as many seats as possible by it's like the old Vindaloo song. We're going to score one more than you. That is the name of the game. In 300 odd, like 326 technically is what you would say, but realistically you want, 350 at least. In 350 constituencies, you want to win by one vote. Now, obviously, that's not very comfortable. You'd ideally like to win by a bit more, but that's got to be your strategy. The way, let's show you a visual thing here. It's like a Jenga tower. What Labour had to do, they had their block, they had to build the highest tower they could get. And that has meant taking blocks away from where you were already stable and adding them to where you didn't have enough. So that's exactly what it's about. Where are we? So, yeah, Labour's vote efficiency, absolutely mad. You would think the Lib Dems' efficiency must have been pretty good as well because they've gained loads of seats without actually gaining votes compared to last time. The Liberal Democrats, they got more votes in 2019 than they did in 2024. Do you know that? Anyone clocks that? They actually got fewer votes in this election. Lots is being made of the fact that obviously Labour got fewer votes than in 2019. But the Lib Dems did as well. Who were the big winners in 2024? Labour and the Lib Dems. The Greens as well, of course. Of course, the Greens won as well. And, indeed, the Greens got way more votes this year, so they sort of won on all fronts, you could argue. But again, the Greens' voter efficiency, just like in 2019, very poor. In fact, if you look, so again, the higher the number, the worse your efficiency is, because it's how many votes you needed per seat won. So in 2019, actually, no, tell a lie, it's about the same. No, sorry, the voter efficiency was actually better in 2024. I apologise. I'm reading the wrong line. But it's, no, it's worse. What am I on about? No, it is worse. No, it's better. Sorry, I'm reading it. It's because I've reordered them. So it was better this year. Yeah, so voter efficiency, just under 500,000 votes per seat won for the Greens this year, where it was like 865,000 in 2019, which is where Reform are now. In fact, no party, well, these are the major parties, actually. Obviously, there are others, like, there's the Northern Ireland parties. I've not included those. Apologies for that if you're from Northern Ireland. But no party had as inefficient a vote in this year than the Greens did in 2019. The media keeps saying it's a lukewarm vote for Labour and more anti-Tory vote. Yes, that's exactly what it is. That was why tactical voting works so well. You know, I saw some Muppets trying to say they're showing the sheer level of tactical voting intention. In fact, let me have a look. Let me just show you. I've got something here. There's lots of things to talk about, but here is, this is from Ashcroft. I've got several slides from Ashcroft polling about people's motivation for voting and how they voted. And I'm not sure how easily you can see that. I'm just going to increase it on my own so I can read it properly. So there's 3 reasons. So this is tracking people. So this is from 2019 Conservative voters, and it's tracking those who switched to Labour, those who switched to Reform UK, those who switched to the Lib Dems, and those who switched to the Green Party, right? Now, in all cases, their top 3 reasons were either that they're out of touch with me, they're not competent, or they didn't deliver what they promised at the last election. Those are the top 3. Those were not the only 3 options. That's why I put the little blurb above that Ashcroft polling gave them. So they didn't just order that. They were given multiple reasons why they would have switched from the Conservative Party, including Partygate and the scandals. Partygate and the scandals did not feature in the top 3 reasons for most Conservatives switching to another party. The top 3 reasons were that they're out of touch with me, they didn't deliver, or they're not competent. But I'll show you something really interesting. For the ones who switched to either Labour, the Lib Dems, or the Greens, what we might call the progressive parties, the reasons were the same in the same order. So in all 3 of those cases, whether they're switching to Labour, the Lib Dems, or the Greens, the primary motivation was they're out of touch with people like me. The second motivation was I don't trust them. And the third motivation was they're not competent. But if you look at the switch to Reform UK, they didn't deliver what they promised at the last election, suddenly sneaks into view. So what's happened here is the I don't trust them has disappeared. This is specifically for Reform UK, the ones who switched to Reform UK. So not, should we say, not progressive voters of the Conservative Party. Stark difference with the type of voter who switched to Labour, Lib Dem or Green and the type who switched to Reform UK. They weren't as bothered about not being able to trust them. They were more bothered that they didn't deliver. And because why is that? Because these are the ones who were attracted to Brexit. But also their second reason was still they're out of touch with people like me. And their third reason was still they are not competent. So trustworthy doesn't appear for Reform. I mean, some of them will have done. Remember, these are the top 3 reasons. So some people who switch to Reform will have presumably cited the trust issue. But it's the second most important issue for the ones who switch to a progressive party. Obviously, this doesn't include those who may have switched to Plaid or the SNP. It's only like the progressive parties that ran the whole of Britain. But yeah, you know, that was less of an issue for them. Remember, in 2019, Boris. So the story of the last Parliament for Boris Johnson is he's a liar, right? He's a liar, and yet people knew he was a liar in 2019. I don't know if people remember. There was a TV debate between him and Jeremy Corbyn. And at one point, Boris Johnson described himself as honest, and the audience laughed. And it was a proper audience laughing. I don't just mean there was a section of the audience that laughed at it, the ones who weren't like going to vote for him anyway. The audience just laughed. Even the ones who were going to vote for him knew he wasn't an honest man. They knew he was a liar. They just thought that he wouldn't lie, against their interests. It doesn't matter if you win by an inch or a mile, winning is winning. I mean, so there are aspects to it where you are going to have to be wary. At the end of the day, it is how you win. Obviously, would Labour have liked to have won 400 odd seats with 40% of the vote? Yes, they would. Of course they would. Because what's got to happen at the next election, they can't rely... I've actually seen some people saying, there'll be even more tactical voting in the next election. It's like, well, tactical voting will still be organised at the next election. But the reason it's being organised is to try and get electoral reform. Everyone, obviously I back stopthetories.vote. And I will say as well, by the way, just, I'll do a video on it at some point when they've done all the number crunching. They didn't let a single Tory in with their advice. In other words, if people had followed their advice, which actually many did, obviously, but, if even more people had followed it, would not have let a single Tory in. So they did not give... There's only 2 seats where what you'd call progressive vote that they gave did not finish either second to the Tories or win. And in both those cases, I believe they were independents anyway, because obviously independents had a good day. So there was not a single seat where Stop the Tories gave advice and that advice was wrong in a way that let a Tory win. So even better than the local elections where there were only like a couple, I think. Actually, were there even any there? No, there weren't any there either. No, sorry, I'm doing them a disservice. So at the local elections and the general elections, stopthetories.vote did not steer anyone wrong. They did not steer anyone wrong. There's like 2 seats where it was literally because an independent beat Labour, I think. I'm pretty sure I'm right in saying that they didn't get 100%, but it's 100% in terms of did not give any advice that let a Tory in. Was the election campaign as nasty as I feared? Yes, it was. In all honesty, it was. It's just it wasn't as effectively nasty as I feared. I did fear it would be more effective than it actually was. So that was the thing. It was as nasty. In fact, it was arguably nastier because when you had, those group of thugs... I mean, there was a lot of physical intimidation as well. A lot of, it's violence. I'm sorry. Even if you're just pushing into people and getting in people's face, that's violence. So there was violence. But I mean, that Workers' Party candidate's son who got bashed up, I didn't expect. I mean, that's like gangster movie stuff. So that you could argue it was even nastier than I thought. But in terms of the behaviour from... certain groups, most especially the Conservatives was my main concern, as well as Reform UK. It was every bit as nasty as I expected. It's just, it didn't work. And another thing I didn't expect, which was a slightly silver lining. So although I'd said Reform UK, and I kept saying, didn't I, they don't have the infrastructure to vet candidates. They cannot expect to get 600 odd candidates that, like Nigel Farage, are racist or homophobic or bigoted in some other way, but understand what they can say in public and what they can't. I said there was no way of them getting 600 odd Nigel Farages. And that was right. And yet, I'm not sure it worked. They got a lot of votes. They got... Easiest way to put it back up is to put this... where is it? Seat efficiency back up again. They got over 4 million votes, which was a bit distressing. Over 4 million votes. But it could have been worse. I mean, in terms of the seats they got, because they weren't able to focus very well. I mean, they had by far and away the worst vote efficiency. It cost them. In fact, that fifth seat, they only won very narrowly. There was a recount. That's why it only came in yesterday. So it almost cost them over 1 million votes per seat. But anyway, so hopefully now the right is feeling the negative effects of first past the post. The previously benefited, they'll potentially rally behind change now. Well, Reform UK ODR, Nigel Farage, Richard Tyson, all that, they're already jumping on it. This is disgraceful. This isn't right. We should have electoral reform. And, and I was talking to some people in WhatsApp chat, and some people are not very happy about the fact that the likes of Nigel Farage are arguing for the same thing sort of we are. But, the way I look at it is we've already done that. My response to that is we've already done it. Last week, what was Nigel Farage and Richard Tice saying? And they've been saying this for a few months, by the way. We want to be the ones that destroy the Tory party. We want to destroy the Tory party, right? Politics can be uncomfortable at times. The fact of the matter is, I wouldn't want to encourage anyone to vote Reform UK, even if they would otherwise vote Tory. I'm quite clear about who I see as the worst. And yet, the fact that Reform UK not only stood, but had Nigel Farage leading them, has cost the Tories a lot of seats, which by definition means it's gained Labour and the Lib Dems. It's more important for the Lib Dems, and I'll say that as a Labour member, because like I said, Labour don't need 412 MPs. It's nice that they've got them. I would have liked them to get even more, but they didn't need them. 350 is okay. 370 is anything more than 370 is a luxury, absolute luxury. So we've already agreed with Reform UK that we wanted the Tories destroyed. So we've already sort of agreed with something Nigel Farage has said. So saying that we also agree that we should have proportional representation. Obviously, we may not want the same system. There's different types of PR, but at the same time, if we're going to try and have a major push on this, we're going to try and make it happen. Ultimately, there will have to be a referendum. There must be a referendum. I know Labour could, in theory, just put it in their manifesto. They're not going to. They've made that clear. That's I think you're beating a dead horse by trying to get them to do that. So realistically, we know a referendum is how it's going to come. And just like in this election, if the right wing is split, then we're more likely to win it. And if that means that, Nigel Farage is on your side for this cause, he was on our side for the election. He was on my side. I don't know. You may not all have liked the fact that the Conservatives won. I don't know. I don't judge. But there we go. Right, let's go through some comments. Reform UK might have got a fair amount of votes, but they did get fewer votes than UKIP in 2015. Yes, absolutely. In terms of share, I haven't actually checked the number of votes, but in terms of share of the vote. So UKIP did better in terms of gathering votes in 2015 than Reform UK have in 2024. But again, it's not about votes. It's about the seats won. So Reform UK have done better than UKIP. However, in terms of the votes won, it is worth bearing in mind, Reform UK are not part of a growing movement. It's the same movement. So, the point you may be making, and I will agree with you on this, it's the same movement as UKIP in 2015. It's largely the same. It's not exactly the same people, because we know there's a disproportionate number of older people in that. And since 2015, many of those would have died, but they have been replaced by others. They're attracting some young people as well. Aaron Bastani famously did a little thing around Essex where he recorded some of those young people who were backing them. So we know, but we know it's not a growing movement. It's largely the same people. It's the same type of people. It's not enough people to sweep to power. It's a large number of people, and in a proportional representation system, they would have a significant representation in Parliament. But I will keep pointing this out. It's like Back to the Future. You've got to think fourth dimensionally, right? The reason why UKIP back in 2015 and Reform UK now have so much support, albeit small minority, but so much support, is because a lot of those people's lives are just being squeezed. They know that they're being screwed over by the establishment. Right? They know that. They feel it. Of course they feel it. their standard of living is actually getting worse. So it's not being greedy. Their standard of living is getting worse. If you make their standard of living better, Reform UK will lose support. They will always have some. We know even in good countries, there's always a pocket of these people, even countries that are, there's always a pocket. There's always things to blame for things. But they will lose that support. They will, if Labour improve people, the test next election is not just can Labour actually get more votes, but can they stop Reform UK getting as many? Because if Labour improve people's standard of living to the point where they can say to people, not show them on a graph, but just say to them, do you feel better off? Yeah. Do you feel things are getting better? Yeah. They'll lose support. Reform UK will lose support. If I'm right, and there's 2 Tory leaders this term, if Farage the second leader, could that cause current Tory MPs to drop the whip and or defect to another party? Entirely possible. More importance, what do I think about the voters? So something I haven't got in my graphics here tonight, I'm afraid, but I have seen it, is, who did it? It might have been More in Common, I forget. But they polled for the people who voted Reform UK, who they would have voted for if Reform UK weren't about. Only 36% said the Conservatives. So this idea that if the Conservatives could persuade Nigel Farage to join them, and if that meant leading them, okay. But if you merged the Conservative Party and Reform UK, the idea that that would lead to the vote being combined, I mean, that's a bit dumb for 2 reasons. First of all, no, it wouldn't. Because 36% of them would have voted Conservative. I think it was something like 24% wouldn't have voted for anyone. So these are people who just wouldn't have voted at all, right? And then there were some who would have voted Labour, some Lib Dem, some of the other parties. But the other thing to point out, and I saw someone saying, this was on LBC. I can't remember who it was. It wasn't like Nick Ferrari or anyone. I can't remember. I don't really watch or listen to LBC, so I don't know all of the people on it. But some idiot on LBC, and this wasn't a caller, this was the actual bloody presenter, said that, the majority of people voted Conservative and Reform UK. It's like, you what, mate? Shall we have a look at this, shall we? So, Conservative 23.7, Reform UK 14.3. It's not really checking out, is it? That's not checking out. That is 38% of people voted Conservative and Reform UK. 38%. There was a majority, if you were to add up Labour, Lib Dems and Greens, if you want to lump parties together, there's a majority voted for that. In fact, what have you got? 33.7, quick maths. 12.2 Lib Dems, sorry. So what have we got there? 45.9. 5.9. 7. 52.7. 52.7 voted for Labour, Lib Dem or Green. If you add on the independents, because all of the independents that won were left-wing as well. I know they're not, I don't think aligning them with Labour is really the right thing to do, but they are all left-wing. Then you'd get like about 55%, wouldn't you? So like the delusion. I mean, it's one thing to look at the results and draw spurious conclusions. That is someone who can't even add up 2 bloody numbers together. And that's how deluded some... And I know this is a commentator on LBC, but that's how some conservatives... That's how some right-wing commentators are looking at this now. If we'd have combined the Conservative and Reform UK vote, then it would have all been fine. It's like, well, first of all, that would still have been... What would that have been? It would still have been less than 40%. That's 38%, isn't it? Let me just double check. That's 38%. Now, let me find something else. I've got various things here. Have I got... Oops. So I've got lists of like turnouts, because obviously it's low turnout. Do bear in mind on the turnout, potentially 3 or 4% may have been caused by postal ballots not going out and... because remember, in terms of turnout, that will have to include overseas people who live overseas now, even those who've lived overseas for a long time. So when we're looking at turnout, if it sounds low, and it is low, don't get me wrong, it is low, but like voter ID issues, postal ballot issues could well have contributed to several percent of that. But it is still low regardless, because it's like 60%. But if I look at the other things, the sort of Excel I've got on the right-hand side, if you look at like percentages to sort of win, I mean, no, what Labour have done this year is like frighteningly. They're, you know, I mean, there's never been such a low vote share get such a large majority, ever. But if we look back, 2019, the Conservatives got 43.6%. 2017, they got 42.3%. 2015, they got 36.9%. You know, 2010, they got 36. Okay, they didn't get a majority then. 2005, Labour got 35.2% and won a majority. You know, so, but mostly you'll see the government that wins tends to get like towards, there's been quite a few elections where the winning party has won over 40% of the vote. So if you're looking at like 38%, that doesn't get, you can win with 38% of the vote. Of course you can, because, I mean, first of all, Labour have done it with significantly less than that. You know, Labour did it in 2005 with significantly less than that. But it's tricky. It's very tricky. And Labour will have benefited from an anti-Tory tactical vote, which, even if it's there in 2028, 2029, may not be as large. They can't count on it being as large. So they really are going to have to persuade a lot of people. But on that note, I'm just going to show you another little graphic, which is really interesting, in terms of the timing of votes. Now, there's a couple of graphics in the Lord Ashcroft polling, which shows this. There's another one. But in this one, so basically the darker colour, it means you waited until the last minute before deciding how to vote. Now, look at this for the Green Party. So what you've got here is you've got quite a lot of people who voted Green, and the Greens did get, you know, massively increased share of the vote. No, well, not just share of the vote, actual votes as well, but both in this election. And yet a lot of them waited to the last minute because, you know, it's like the Owen Jones argument, wasn't it? The Labour government's going to happen anyway, so it's safe to vote Green, right? Now, a lot of them sort of took that to heart. So that this suggests, you know, that if we think about the tactical voting nature of this, remember, people only vote tactically if they feel they need to. Remember, a lot of people that voted tactically. Now, my push was we want to reduce the Tories to as little as possible, because if we could have a Lib Dem-led opposition, that would be way better. That's a game changer, which it would have been. We didn't get it. Never mind. But for a lot of people, they're not that bothered. They don't think about politics in that much detail. They just didn't want the Tories in government. They wanted someone else. If that someone else is Labour, great. But, you know, they wanted someone else. And yet, tactical voting is asking you to vote for someone you'd prefer not to, but just to avoid your worst possible option. So there's a lot of people clearly who would have, if they had to vote Labour or Lib Dem in order to make sure the Tory government didn't happen, they would have done. So, and you can see that with the Green Party there, and the Liberal Democrats to a slightly lesser extent, with the larger, darker blocks at the bottom. They waited until the last minute before making that decision, because they wanted to be assured that they weren't risking the Tories winning. And by the final few days, I mean, even the way the Tories were campaigning told you that they knew that they were losing. They were just, the way they were campaigning was not as a government that had a chance. It wasn't even a party that thought it could get its wangly hung parliament, which wouldn't have helped it anyway. I mean, okay, it's better than what they've got now, but you know, it wouldn't have helped them. So not only did we have a lot of tactical voting, we also had a lot of people that looked like they would have, and I don't want to draw too strong a connection here because I'm inferring things here, just to be clear, but it looks very much like we had another load of people that would have been prepared to vote tactically if they had to. They were just people that probably would have thought they'd have to hold their nose a bit more to do so, but they would have done it. That's, because that is the explanation for waiting so much longer. Whereas you look at the Labour and the SNP vote, much smaller dark blocks at the bottom. They were much more set in their views further out from the election. How did the Greens manage to take 2 seats on the Tories? Tactical voting. Tactical voting. It cannot be overstated as well just how much the Tories have pissed people off. I mean, again, I'll go back to those reasons. For the Green Party, it's the same reasons for all the others, apart from Reform, of course. Number one reason, they're out of touch with people like me. That's a big deal. That is a big deal. You've got Rishi Sunak, the richest MP there's ever been. People say richer than the king. I don't know whether that's quite true or not, but everyone sort of says it as that. But, he's this super wealthy man who was telling people in a cost of living crisis, oh, we're getting through this. We're getting through it. Don't you worry. It's like, it's on another level. People know that he wasn't struggling from the cost of living crisis. It's the most... I wouldn't have said anything like that to people because I didn't struggle with the cost of living crisis because I make enough money to still be able to afford all the, not just basics, but things I want, not just things I need. I would never say to people, oh, we could get through this if I'm not actually sharing in that deprivation. And yet Rishi's son, and yet people could look at me and wouldn't necessarily know. I mean, you can't just look at me and know that I'm not sure. I mean, I'm going around in bloody scruffy T-shirts all the time, for Christ's sake. So someone just looking at me wouldn't know that I'm not part of the group that's struggling from the cost of living crisis. But people did know that of Rishi Sunak, and he still did it. It's absolutely insane. Will they be in for 2 terms at least? I do think so. I don't want to be complacent. Again, when people are talking about the fragility of this coalition that Labour have built, they are right about that. It was an absolute masterstroke of vote efficiency, but it is true to say, if you think about the Conservatives in 2019, we talk about they built up this coalition. You had the red wall type of voters who wanted state intervention. They weren't bothered about high taxes or the rest of it. And then they had their sort of blue wall, their traditional voters who basically just wanted to keep Corbyn out. And it's true. Keir Starmer has built a different type of coalition as well. You've got different groups of voters who have different needs. But what I would say is the big difference there's 2 big differences between Labour and the Conservatives from 2019. The first big difference is that Boris Johnson built this coalition of competing interests. So the Red Wall wanted levelling up, they wanted state investment, and they didn't mind the taxes to pay for it. The Blue Wall did not want levelling up because they are already the ones winning in the inequality wars. So why would they want to pay out taxes so that we can help people further down the chain than them catch up to them? That's mad. You don't want that. So they had competing, needs. But the other problem with this coalition that Boris Johnson brought up is it was based on lies. It was based on promising to deliver things that he was never going to be able to deliver. And look what's happened. Number one reason for switching to Reform UK, they didn't deliver what they promised at the last election. And the thing is, they never could. Labour can deliver what they're promising. Whether they do is down to them. But and hopefully only down to them, not mad circumstances. Again, I keep saying, can we not have an invasion of space monkeys for a few years at least? And the other thing is that Labour are not... The people they've won over do not face mutually exclusive needs. They don't face mutually exclusive needs. And so Labour have presented a more honest offer, and it's one that is deliverable. They're not having to lie about it. They're not having to say, there will be no tariff barriers with the EU. Oh, no, there won't be any checks in the Irish Sea. Oh, you can just, if they do ask you for any paperwork, just send it to me and I'll throw it in the bin. There's none of that. None of that. Emily Thornberry was correct when she said that 2019, the Tories would lose many seats after a single issue election. Yeah, Emily Thornberry, I'll give her full credit here. She was a believer. I think somewhere, it might have been The Guardian, it's probably The Guardian. She wrote that quite soon after the election, she was writing about 1906, when the Conservatives then in 1900 won this massive majority based on culture wars, Boer War related that time rather than Brexit. It's always a B thing, isn't it? And they got smashed in 1906, and the Liberals won their large majority, and that was it. Yeah. So, I'll be honest, I didn't have this faith. I didn't expect to see this happening. I really couldn't see Labour. Labour have had to not only detoxify their own personal brand. That wasn't enough. That really wasn't enough. They also had to turn themselves into something that Labour almost never turned themselves into: a focused, ruthless campaigning machine. And also they had to do it with Keir Starmer as leader, because he was the only one that could have done it and that they had access to at the time, realistic. I think there are other good ones who under different circumstances could have done, but at the time. And let us be honest, Keir Starmer is not a natural campaigner. In fact, there's various people writing about the fact he's come over way more confident in his press conference today than he has done at any point in the campaign. And that's because his press conference today was not about winning votes. It was about explaining what he's going to do as an administrator. And he's got experience of that. He's got experience of coming. He ran a government department. He ran the Crown Prosecution Service, and he came in and he didn't just come in as a manager. Like, he did reform things. He changed things. So, but as a campaigner, yeah, no, he's not good. He's not at all good. So we had to do it with someone who wasn't particularly charismatic, who wasn't a good campaigner. We had to detoxify the brand, and we had to turn the whole party into a ruthlessly focused. And it's very difficult in Labour, because they always say the difference between the left and the right. The left is very much about principle. It's very difficult to get people to sort of even compromise on principles. Whereas for the right wing, they're usually more ruthless, because for them, the principle is power. That is it. That's the overriding principle. Jeffrey's saying, would have voted tactically for the Lib Dems, maybe Greens, if it weren't a safe Labour seat, though I preferred my previous Labour MP before the boundary changes. So there were people who didn't have to vote tactically, of course. I mean, I didn't have to, even though my seat was not safe, but the tactical vote was Labour anyway, so that happened to align with me. And there would have been a lot of people like that, and that's fine. We didn't need half the people in the country or a majority to vote tactically. We just needed like a third or something, or a quarter. I think we might have got about a quarter. But there we go. What sort of role could Starmer give Thornberry, since she doesn't have Attorney General role? It's a good question. I hope she gets a really good role. I've got a lot of time for Emily Thornberry. Maybe something along the lines of like work with the EU. It's a bit of a shame that it may not be a cabinet position, because, I do think she's got a lot of useful things to say at cabinet level. But maybe, because some people have argued that being Attorney General wouldn't have been a good role for anyway, because Attorney General, like I said in my video today, your job is to just tell the government you can't do that, it's illegal. It's like, that's literally your job, to say, yeah, this is legal. It's not to say whether it's a good policy. Obviously, anyone in cabinet can have a view, but it's not your job as Attorney General to say whether a policy is good or not. It's purely to tell them whether it's legal or not. Is this legal? No, you can't invade that country. No, you can't send all those people off to Rwanda. That is basically the job of the Attorney General. So, although Emily Thornberry would have been able to do that job, it's not a great role. Whereas maybe she could be given a better role, even if it's not quite at cabinet level. But someone like Emily Thornberry, I could see some role in EU relations or EU policy, maybe. Ranga Pegam, I as chuffed as I am on Starmer's immediate focus on getting proper scientists and experts in. Yeah, I mean, you can't go mad on like just appointing non-MPs to ministerial roles. I mean, you don't want to do it too much. But I mean, the one that's most exciting for me is Timpson, because he is, and look him up if you don't know much about his work on prison reform. You know, he is someone whose attitude is we send too many people to prison. You know, it's this wrong-headedness of, you know, we have the laws, people know the laws. If they break them, chuck them in prison. He is dead against that. It's like, this is not, in fact, you know, there's a clip been going around recently from him. Recently, he said this recently. He said, people in prison, split them into three. There's a third of people absolutely should be in prison. No, yeah, they should absolutely be in prison. He says there's a third of people in prison who need punishing, but prison is not the right way to do it. It should be community-based punishment so that they can still do their jobs. You're not knackering the economy. They can still do their jobs, read their kids' bedtime stories, all the rest of it, but they're still getting their punishment. And he says there's a third of people shouldn't be there. Really shouldn't be there. They've been dealt with completely wrong. And that's a remarkable thing to say to someone who is now the prison's... Because think about it this way. Keir Starmer could have appointed him to be an advisor, couldn't he? Didn't have to make him the prisons minister. He could have just had him as an advisor. Like some of your ideas, don't agree with them all, like some of them though. So why don't you advise us? Because they're going to have lots of advisors. Keir Starmer's government, you know, himself personally, as well as his secretaries of state, his cabinet ministers, they are going to appoint a lot of advisors. A lot of advisors are going to change in the next year. He could have just said, James, mate, would you like to advise us on prison policy? And then he would have been a voice at the table. But he's made him prisons minister. So he is the guy who's... okay, he's got senior... Like, Shabana Mahmood will be his political boss. She is the Secretary of State for Justice. But nonetheless, he is a policy maker. That's, you know, that to me, you can't say that Starmer's planning on just carrying on with the same broken system that the Tories have had, because that's a nonsense. Timpson wouldn't agree to do that. Would not agree to do it. And as Starmer said, someone's just said England's won. Penalties. We actually won on penalties. This did not happen in my youth. Wouldn't it be a strange feeling that Gareth Southgate's actually been the manager? Was this his 100th game? Sorry to distract with a bit of football. Was this someone... I think this was Gareth Southgate's 100th game, wouldn't it? And the man who famously skied it in 1996 as a player on penalties, not that it wasn't his fault, you don't blame him, has actually won his 100th game on penalties. Bizarre. Anyway, sorry about that. Sorry if you're Swiss, by the way. I apologise. So, yeah, it's... Because Keir Starmer did a press conference. I don't think you saw it. It was very different to the sort of press conference Rishi Sunak would have given. And he said in it, you know, we've talked to these people a lot. He said we've you know, we haven't just rung them up. He said we've been talking with these people about what we want to do for months. We've asked them in advance. So he has sat down with James Timpson and said, this is what I want to do with prisons. Timpson would not have agreed to do this. He's like a businessman, right? He's actually giving up time. And okay, there'll be a bit of remuneration because he's going to be in the House of Lords, right? And he's going to have a ministerial salary. But that's not, you know, he's a wealthy businessman. And he's giving up his time to fix prisons. Not to give out contracts to companies he's got shares in, you know, like Rishi Sunak, right? He's giving up his time to actually, because we know what he wants for prisons. He wants it to not be a home for people who shouldn't be there. He don't want people like going through a sister conveyor belt and coming out the other end and going back into prison. We know what his attitude on prisons is. And therefore, the fact that he's been made prisons minister means that that's what Starmer wants as well. That appointment for me just blew me away. Completely blew me away. But anyway. Craig saying it's potentially the way to both solve the prisons crisis and do so with a structure behind it. You knock 2/3 of the people out of the prison that gives scope for treating those who remain better. See, that's my attitude. Like in the first instance, I can completely believe that we are going to have a prison building program, because Keir Starmer says things like, I can't build a prison in 24 hours, which is why we're going to have to carry on with this releasing of prisoners early policy. That doesn't mean to say the policy will stay exactly the same, because they may change the guidelines for who gets released early. For example, there's been a little bit too much recently of violent offenders being released early. So maybe we'll look at who we're releasing early. But, I can believe that just because the public's not there yet. James Timpson might be the prisons minister, but that doesn't mean to say the public are behind his ideas. So I can believe that there'll be, talk of a new prison being built. But then if we get to the position where we've got this extra prison capacity and then all of a sudden we massively don't need it, well, prisons are overcrowded as they are. So it allows us to, each prison doesn't need as many people, and they're massively short-staffed as well. So we can use the prison staff more efficiently, use the space more efficiently. A prison shouldn't just be a load of cells. There should be far more space. Like there are Scandinavian countries like immediately to our east that have a much more enlightened attitude to penal service. And they spend a lot of time actively working with people in terms of dealing with the root causes so that they don't reoffend. There are some countries where rates of reoffending is really low. That should be the measure of success in a justice system. Reoffending rates. There's various metrics that are reported on in the news. When it comes to the justice system, one of the key metrics should be reoffending rates. That should be in the news all the time. It's never in the news, is it? It's never in the news. That should be a real stick to judge a government by. But anyway. Was surprised to hear Max saying Keir Starmer could be forced to resign before Labour's first 5-year term. What circumstances could that happen? Only an absolute crash in the polls. I mean, it's really this simple. Politics is a brutal game. As soon as you lose the voters, you're gone. Boris Johnson, and he's still got his fans now. Loads of Tory MPs going, they think he's a genius because he won the mayoral election when he wasn't expected to. But I will remind people, when he beat Ken Livingstone, he initially wasn't beating Ken Livingstone. He was going to lose that election all day long. Then he brought in Isaac Levido, ironically. And Ken Livingstone, even then, could have beaten him, but he failed. He failed to recognise that Boris Johnson had then fundamentally changed his campaign strategy. So Ken Livingstone just failed to adapt. So it was a combination of Boris Johnson going from a crap campaign to a good campaign and Kevin Livingstone failing to notice that this had happened. And that sort of began his mystique. And then when he won in 2019, as far as most Conservatives were concerned, he's an election winning genius. And yet, as soon as he lost the public, gone. So if Keir Starmer does the same, absolutely. Do I think that's going to happen in the next 5 years? No, I don't. But you can't rule anything out. At the end of the day, he could shit the bed. I would be very surprised. I don't think he's going to. I certainly wouldn't put his chances of being deposed before the next election at anything close to 50%. Peter saying, for once I'm happy, positive about the future. At 17, going to be living under a Labour government my young adult years. All I've ever known is Tory crisis. Well, that is the thing, you see. You will not remember what it was like under Labour. And that's would be my message to young people in general. It's good that you've got hope. I would understand young people being sceptical. After all, everyone has been told so often, they're just the same, just the same. Someone my age doesn't have the excuse to fall for that because we remember the last Labour government. Anyone who's as old as I am or older that thinks, they're just the same, you have been kicked in the head by a horse. Demonstrably, it was not the same. Demonstrably not the same. But if you're young, you cannot know. You can read in history books, but you're just reading other people's opinions, aren't you? You can't know, but you are going to know in a few years' time. You're going to see the difference. I was young when Labour last came to power. I was just shy of my 21st birthday when Labour last won power from the Conservatives. So I was young, not as young as you. And it was immediately obvious. You noticed it. I didn't have to look at graphs, although I did anyway, because that's the sort of person I am. I felt it. I noticed it. I was a young teacher. The starting teaching salary, obviously I was climbing the scale as well, but the starting teaching salary just took off. Tushans just said, reoffending rates very low in Saudi and North Korea. Yeah, there's a slightly different reason for that. We're not really in favour of that. we're not in favour of any solution that solves the problem, particularly if it creates extra problems. But there we go. So let me, I'm just going to quickly see, because we're running out of time, and obviously we've had various tangents on here. Is there anything? So this will be quite interesting if we're looking ahead to the future. Hold on, where's it gone? So Ashcroft also did a little poll of how likely people would be to return to the Tories. Now, obviously, bear in mind, anyone who says something like, I'm never voting for them again, doesn't mean they're never voting for them again. You know, it just... But what it does suggest, if someone says, like at the bottom here, I can't see myself ever voting Conservative again, and this is 18%. So that's 18% of their 2019 vote. So let me just do a little bit of quick maths. So straight away, I'm just going to say, if that were true and the Conservatives couldn't build up any extra support, they'd be limited to about 36% of the vote. If that 18% is telling the truth. Now, in reality, some of those 80% probably will vote Conservative at some point in the future. But what they're basically saying is they're going to have to change out of all recognition. So the Conservative Party is going to have to fundamentally change from what it is now to get them to vote Conservative again. Or Labour would have to turn out to be the devil itself. But in terms of the breakdown, in terms of overall, 44% say the Conservatives didn't deserve to win the election, but they do now have a chance to get their act together. They might vote at the next election. So they're basically inviting the Conservatives to change, in their eyes, one way or the other, and win their vote back. So that is less than half of Conservative voters from 2019 saying, we'll give you a chance to change. But if they're not seen as changing, then they'll still have lost their vote. 29% saying, I might vote again one day, but I doubt it'll be the next election. So that's basically people going, I believe, you know, at some point in the future, if they change, absolutely, but I don't think they're going to change that quickly. And then 18% saying, you know, don't ever see it again. And also bear in mind, alongside that, you've got the fact that they've lost so many young people that when they find themselves in 8 to 10 years' time, where maybe they've rebuilt a bit, they'll have lost a lot of their natural support from the older generation. I'll tell you what is interesting, though. So if we look along the parties here, so in terms of the ones who are saying, I could see myself voting Conservative at the next election if they change, by far the biggest chunk of that are those who went to the Liberal Democrats and the Greens. Isn't that interesting? I wouldn't have guessed that. I would have thought those who went to the Greens, in particular, would have been the one... No, but the Lib Dems, I believe, but the Greens, I would have thought they'd have been the ones who were attracted by... Or sorry, should we say repelled in the case of the Conservatives? You would guess, wouldn't you, most repelled by their attitude to net zero, if they've naturally gone to the Greens. And therefore, because the Conservatives are still sort of... all of the major contenders are still very anti-net zero, I would have thought that the number who would be prepared to come back to the Conservatives quite quickly would be much smaller in the Green Party, but apparently not. It's interesting, isn't it? Interesting. The Greens do progressive things in a Conservative way. Yeah, well, they do. They are an odd party because obviously where they're in power, they tend to win power in very NIMBY sensitive areas. So you end up with a bizarre situation where it's like the Green Party, and they really do believe, obviously, I'm not suggesting they're charlatans, they do believe in the climate emergency and the need to tackle it and what you need to do to tackle it. And yet, where they're in power, it's like, no, you can't have a solar farm. That's ridiculous. Why would we want more solar here? Or no, we don't want that railway running through here. So it's like, we should build more trains. Oh, no, not here. We don't want railways here. Or, oh, we need more solar. Oh, but not here. So you do get that weirdness with the Green Party. But again, I still find it odd. But maybe it is to do with those areas as well. Maybe more of those Conservatives are switched to the Greens in areas where the Greens do well locally. Maybe it's just those NIMBY areas. Who knows? All very odd. We need to tell our Tory friends don't vote Tory because they were not right wing enough. Well, there were some who sort of said that. That did come up. Can I find actually? I thought I'd done a graphic for that somewhere. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. So is it? So it says here of 14% of Conservative defectors. Overall, 14% of Conservative defectors said they were not Conservative enough, and 3% say they'd moved too far to the right. Now, the thing about that is that would be the green light to the Conservatives to suggest they'd lost more votes to people thinking they didn't go crazy enough than thought they went too crazy. And that, again, if I can find it, because I'm pretty sure I've got another graphic here. No, that was something else. Here it is. And this shows it. So 2019 Conservative voters, that bar just second from the top, again shows the problem they've had. They lost more of their 2019 voters to Reform UK than Labour, the Lib Dems and the Green Party combined. So Labour, Lib Dem and Green Party, you're talking about like 21% lost to them, 23% to Reform UK. At the same time, you can look at that and say the Conservatives lost about the same number of votes to the centre or progressive parties than they did to the far right or Reform UK. And the problem is, because they're looking at the individual bars, they're seeing Reform UK as the main problem. And the problem is, by trying to... what the Conservatives need to do is they actually need to become more like Labour, Lib Dem, Green in terms of appealing to that biggest block of voters, and counter Reform UK in some other way. Whereas they do the opposite. So what they do is they argue against the policies that Labour, the Lib Dems and the Greens have, which are actually popular. And they don't argue with Reform UK's policies. They simply try to become more like them to chase after those voters. And I think that is getting it the wrong way round. And anyone who understands a normal distribution curve should understand why that is getting it the wrong way round. And Kemi Badenoch should. She's a bloody engineer. She should understand distribution curves. And yet she doesn't appear to, does she? But there we go. Putting out to saying 25, I only have vague memories of my childhood with Labour. My granddad, old school Labour councillor, told me about how good they were. I mean, obviously people like that will. I mean, you'll find people like old Conservatives will tell you how great it was under Thatcher. And yet, what I try and keep saying to people is, there were some people in some parts of the country that got richer under Thatcher, right? There were some people who won under Thatcher. But if you look at the north of England, parts of Wales, Scotland were devastated by Thatcher. And I mean, whole communities. There was the specials, the song Ghost Town. That was a song about what Thatcher did to the communities. It wasn't a partisan song, we don't like Thatcher. It was that the whole communities had the hearts ripped out of them because their major source of wealth just disappeared. People talk about, and I said this recently, people talk about the way she trashed public services and sold off our national assets. But she destroyed British industry as well. It wasn't just about, national assets. It wasn't just that she was a one-woman campaigner against socialism. She destroyed British industry. How the hell does a capitalist do that? And I mean deliberately. I don't mean she put things like the current government did a lot. They wanted to do a lot of things and they were just incompetent. So a lot of the things they did accidentally. Whereas Thatcher did it deliberately. She had... we actually had a competitive computer industry. I don't think ultimately we would ever have competed with America. But we had a competitive world-leading computer industry. She deliberately closed it off. She ended it. We used to have, when I was a kid, you were taught computing. When I was a young kid, you were taught computing. And I remember when it all stopped. When I was in comprehensive school, after the second year, all of a sudden we had no more computing lessons. Just stopped. Because the government, I didn't appreciate this at the time, but I did when I was older and was finding out about these things from older people, older teachers that I talked to. The Conservative government made the decision to stop teaching computing. Because these days, when we've tried to restart, we've now realised it's a bad mistake. We've tried to restart it. And do you know what? We don't have enough people who know about computing to teach it. So we can't actually get access to enough computing teachers. So we, even though even the Conservatives know that was a mistake and we should, teach it again, we can't. But we could then. We had the teachers then. Not anymore. Phil, most progressive Westminster Parliament ever. Well, we will see. But in terms of representation, yeah, because what we've got is we've now got a cabinet that's actually quite close to the distribution of people by education. I actually may have talked them down a little bit in my earlier video when I was saying it's not quite the same. It's actually now, I gather, because of a few extra appointments, the cabinet is really very close to the same distribution of people who went to state school, grammar school and private school. So it's from an educational background point of view, we have never had a more representative cabinet ever. And it's obviously way different to the last one. We've got, put it this way, Eton's not good. I'd had someone put a comment on going, well, at least we're breaking the Oxbridge mindset. And it's like, well, Oxford and Cambridge are really good universities. Even people from ordinary state school backgrounds that are clever go there. And the last thing I want is to say we shouldn't have clever people in cabinet, right? So there will still be a lot of people in cabinet who went to Oxford or Cambridge. Do you know what? Achievers go there as well. Working class achievers go there as well. But Eton is not represented. Shall we put it that way? Eton, Winchester, Harrow, all those places. Sorry, no. Not that I would instantly dismiss anyone. George Orwell went to Eton. He's a good sort. That's the odd one. But it's, from that point of view, never more representative. We've never had such a high proportion of women in the cabinet. I don't know about Parliament itself, but when, someone's going to crunch the numbers at some point, it wouldn't surprise me if it's at least right up there. It's not going to be 50% women, but I think it's over 40% women in Parliament now. There's really, Alex just saying it's 40% Oxbridge. Again, Oxford and Cambridge are top university. If doesn't matter what background you're from, if you're driven to achieve, you'll naturally gravitate towards those. So I don't judge that. Admittedly, I don't, and I know I've put on record, I don't like having so many politicians having done the PPE course at Oxford. That's a specific course because it encourages too much groupthink, and we have got that. Even Rachel Reeves, I'm a big fan of Rachel Reeves because she has actually done stuff outside of Parliament, good stuff as well. But she did that bloody degree. But at least she will have been able to challenge any sort of wrong views in it. But there we go. Matthew saying, Eton not a good private school in terms of academic performance compared to other private schools. No, indeed. They teach you how to win at life by fair means or foul. And foul, when you're in a privileged position, is often easier. Yeah, it's not a proper school. It's not a proper school. It's a sink or swim type of school, but one that instills in you a real sense of entitlement. So, sending someone like Boris Johnson from Boris Johnson's family to a place like Eton was absolutely asking for trouble. And I don't know how anyone thought a Boris Johnson government would ever turn to the good of anyone. Even Boris Johnson. He's a pissing arsonist. He's an arsonist wearing a petrol-doused overalls. But there we go. Right, we'll have to call it there. We'll run out of time. In fact, well, someone's just said that Alec Barrett, Lammy was the first male black Brit to go to Harvard. Yeah, Lammy is also, he's an interesting route himself. I am very happy with the cabinet. There'll be a few in there that are untested. There are some that are untested. There's the odd one in there that's not quite in the role I think they should be. I've made no secret about that. Yeah, Stan went to Oxbridge postgraduate. A lot will have done. But he went to Leeds for his first degree, so he's all right. But there we go. We'll call it there. Thank you very much for coming on, everyone. It'll be interesting to see where we go from here. What's going to be the exciting news? Because obviously Brexit's still going to happen. There'll still be things to talk about Brexit. In fact, I'm going to be doing some new things on Brexit next week, so I'll have to watch out for that. And because, as I say, the big calls for me are going to be now pushing for... I'm not sitting back and thinking, oh, everything's going to be brilliant now. I'm not sitting back because I know that there are 3 great areas of uncertainty that need dealing with. 3 massive gaping wounds in our future that need closing off. Electoral reform, media reform, and dealing with Brexit. 3 biggest things for me. And everything else that needs dealing with becomes way easier and way more inevitable if we deal with those 3 things. But there it is. Have a great rest of evening, everyone. Thanks for coming on. And until next time, I'll see you later.